Hey everybody, I'm coming at you today with a sound design tutorial. A little while ago I was on the Ableton Live group on Facebook and I asked everybody for some requests of things in sound design that they'd had some trouble emulating. And Chris Smith posted this tune by Tiesto and KSHMR called Secrets. It's got a big fat juicy lead in it and I'm going to build it from the ground up for you guys today. So Chris Smith, this one's for you, brother. This was actually a good example because this project is posted on Splice and I could download the project file and get access to all the original individual tracks. So here is the original lead isolated so you can hear it. And then here it is with the rest of the backing track. Okay. Now here is my version of the lead. So as you can hear, it's pretty close to the original sound, but I actually did add a few of my own tweaks to it to differentiate it a little bit. And if there's anybody who's super impatient and just wants to grab the patch, I'm giving this one away for free. Check the links below the video, grab it, it's yours. But we're going to take a look step by step now at how I created this. So here is the original multi-parts that comprise that lead. And these are from Splice. The project is available free from Splice, so if you want to check it out, just look it up on Splice. You can download the full project file and the stems. So you can see what they did here is they created the lead from 4 separate parts, and then they compressed them and put them all together using bus effects. And I really wanted to challenge myself with this project. So instead of using 4 individual synths and a whole bunch of effects, I actually recreated this lead entirely in one instance of XFer Serum, and I didn't use any external effects at all, except for one sidechain compressor. So I really wanted to push myself to see if I could flex the full power of Serum to be able to create this really fairly thick and complex sound using entirely just one synth and no effects. Let's take a look at these individual layers. I think these were all created in Synth. So here is the original main lead layer. So it's got a huge reverb on it, it's got some noise, it's a big saw wave, or maybe a couple saw waves stacked up. So let me take you inside my instance of Serum, and I'll show you how I started to build it. So here is Serum, and I'm using almost every feature in Serum for this patch. So I'm going to start turning things off, and I'm just going to let you listen to piece by piece exactly what I did. So I'm actually going to turn all the effects off, and I'm going to let you hear each layer as I add it in. So there, all the effects are off, and we're going to start with just one oscillator. So I started with oscillator A using the default saw wave because this sound is primarily built around saws. And I added 2 unison voices, and that's pretty much it. So check this out. Now I did change a couple things from default on this. I have the amp envelope, and I created a little bit of a drop here in amplitude just to get a slight bit of that pluckiness on the amp envelope. And that is pretty much the core of that sound. Now this one has a big reverb on it, and I'm going to turn that on in my effects. So I also use the Serum reverb, and the Serum reverb is also sidechained internally within Serum. So check this out. So we've got this macro down here that sidechains the reverb using an LFO. And I'm going to explain that in a sec, but I'm just going to continue stacking this sound up for now. Now we also have some noise. Let's go back here and we'll solo that. Okay, we'll go back to my instance of Serum. I added in the noise oscillator, and I chose the noise type SH1 from the Roland SH1. And let's listen to that. Here's the noise oscillator on its own. Okay, so a bit of noise, and what's happening is this LFO right here, which is set on one of the sidechain presets, is doing that sidechaining effect. So it's actually working on the volume of the noise oscillator and of the main oscillator A, and it's also operating on the reverb. So it's modulating the reverb wet dry, and so it's giving you that really nice sidechain pumping effect that would normally come from a sidechain compressor. So that's the first layer to the sound. So let's take a look at that second layer. What we've got here now is this one called dry muted lead support. Sounds like this. So it's a nice contrast to this top one that's all soaked in reverb. This one's going to be nice and dry. It's going to sound close and up front in the mix. It also has some lower frequencies and has the top end removed. So I wanted to emulate that in Serum. Let's pop Serum open again. And how I did that is by using the sub oscillator. So we'll turn the noise oscillator and oscillator A off. And I took the sub oscillator and I used another saw wave. But we have on our effects module, we have all these different effects, including the reverb, and that would normally soak it, but I have direct out as an option on the sub oscillator. And what that does is it routes it bypassing the filter and bypassing all the master effects. So you have a nice, clean, totally dry output from this sub that gives you that exact same feel of that right in your face, up close patch. All right, so that's how I did it. And here's what they sound like stacked together. Let's take a look at the third layer. So this one's another dry lead, but this one's called dry open, and it's basically the same as the second one, but it has a lot more top end. You can hear its saw waves still. It has a lot of noise up top, and I felt like I was getting enough of that from the initial oscillator that I built in Serum. So I actually just said, I'm going to get that sound from this oscillator right here. I'm going to be okay with what's coming out of it. You can play with the noise oscillator volume if you need to get a bit more of that top end. So that one was similar enough in sound to me to the third layer. But it's the fourth layer where the magic really starts to happen. So check this out. So this patch is coming in and accenting the original sound and adding a lot of stereo width to the signal. So this is using a lot of detuned unison voices, and you can hear some noise up there too. So let's take a look at how I emulated that inside of Serum. I did that with oscillator B. So we've turned off oscillator A, the sub, the noise, and what I did is I created this sound using a wavetable, because it didn't quite sound like a saw, and it didn't quite sound like a square. It sounded somewhere in between. So what I did is I used a standard saw wave in frame 1, and then I created a standard square wave in a second frame, and I used the morph spectral to go between them. And that gives me control over the wavetable position right here, and I can kind of meld and blend between them. Then what I did is added in 16 unison voices and some detune to give it that nice stereo spread. So let's turn off that sidechain and reverb and check this out. Now, the interesting thing was the original sound had this jump in it per octave. So if we listen to these original guys, that's up an octave, and this is up 2 octaves. And I was able to emulate that in Serum. Normally that would have presented a bit of a problem because using only one synth, the rest of the patch was staying at its regular pitch, and then just this one layer was jumping up and down. So what I did is solve that with a macro in Serum. So I used this macro right here called detune octave, and I used the mod matrix to be able to map that to master tune. And let's find that one. That was B octave right there. So you can see macro 3 is mapped out to B octave. And when this macro turns up and this macro is automated, it allows that particular layer only to jump up. So if we take a look at our automation here on the track, we can see right here is where it jumps. So we were able to get that nice jump in pitch from that particular layer. Now there's one additional piece to this sound, and it had this kind of short slide into the notes that I could hear. It wasn't hitting just directly on pitch. It had this nice short little slide. Let's go look at the original sound again. So it had this little tiny pitch slide, and what I did is emulated that using a pitch envelope on this particular oscillator. So in the mod matrix, we have, you can see envelope 2, and this is set so it has only a 27 millisecond decay and 0 sustain. So it's just a short little pitch envelope to work with it there. And what I did is negative mod here, negative 18 semitones of mod to master tune to get that nice front piece of it to work. So then what I did is I used the slide in macro, this macro 1, and I mapped that out to the decay time. So we have the ability to kind of work with the different decay times. Now the original synth didn't do that. The original sound, I added this in as just a bit of an extra character feature. So let's check it out without. Let's turn it on. So you can dial that in exactly to where you want it, but I figured it sounded like it was somewhere right about there. So let's go ahead and stack all of these guys up together. We're going to turn the sub oscillator back on, oscillator A, the noise oscillator, and we will go ahead and return this to where it was. And you can see this add detune right here. This macro is mapped out to the level of this. So what that allows me to do, if we click on macro 2, you can see where these guys come in. I automated that up. So macro 2 comes up, bringing up the level of that. So let's check it out. There's the core of our sound using the oscillators, noise, sub, and all that jazz. Now let's take a look at what I added on for filters and effects. So we're going to turn that sidechain off just so we can hear things nice and clean. And I added the per voice filter using a high pass 12 and a bit of drive just to add some distortion and to remove some of the low end. So let's take a look at the effects. The effects is where a lot of the extra meat of the sound comes in. So we have distortions turned on. I'm using the diode 2 type, which is a pretty crunchy distortion. And I'm using the post filter in high pass mode. And what that's doing is removing distortion on the lows and just high passing the distortion after the effect. We've got some drive, some mix. So let's check it out without and with. Next up, we've got the hyper and dimension expander. So if we turn that on, I've got the size and mix controls up a little bit just to add some sonic space around it, fatten it up a bit. But we have modulation that is on the unison. So we've got unison maxed out, and that is mapped out to the add detune macro. And so when that comes on, that's adding in a lot of extra unison voices and helping to really hype up that extra piece of the sound. Next up is the multi-band compressor. And that's acting more as a special effect to add a bunch of top-end buzz, high-end frequencies to it. So it just adds a nice sheen to the top end. Then we have a delay, a lot of feedback, and it is BPM synced, linked, so it's a mono delay to the 8th note. And you can see down here that it's actually got nothing going on for mix, and that's because I've used the mod wheel to be able to modulate that. Because in the original lead, if you check this out, it's got this delay that tapers out at the end of it. So it's got that reverb and delay that you can really hear, and that's an 1/8 note delay. And so what I did is I simulated that using the mod wheel. So if we take a look at what we have for modulation, we've got mod wheel, and that comes up just at the very end of the patch. So here's what it sounds like. So let's check out the rest of the effects. After the delay, here's our big reverb, and you've definitely heard that. So let's turn up that macro so you can check it out. Just adds that nice sidechain big room feel to it. After the reverb, we have an EQ. And what the EQ is doing here is it's got a bell curve at 1320 hertz, pushing up the gain, 7 dB, adding a lot of mids to it, upper mids. And then it's got a high shelf at 47, and that is adding 8 dB on the top end as well. So here's the EQ. And the last effect in the whole chain is another high pass filter. So I have this one in high pass 6, bit of cutoff on it, and it's adding in another stage of drive. So there you have it. That's my remake in Serum of the Tiesto and KSHMR Secrets lead. I wanted to do it entirely in one instance of one synth using no external effects, and I think we did a pretty good job of that. Serum is an absolutely incredible synth. It's so deep. It has so many features inside of it that it takes a lot to be able to create a sound like that and to be able to modulate it in the way that it's being modulated, get all those different range of timbres out of it using only one synth. So big shout outs to Steve Duda and XFer Records for making such a badass synth. It's been an absolute pleasure to work inside of it. As always, I've included this synth patch as a free download, so just check the links underneath the video and like the video and subscribe to the channel to stay fresh on all of our new updates. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'll catch you next time. Take it easy.